You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
It's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in '79. In Guatemala it led to massive atrocities which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate, and they were gaining a lot of ground, so that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
Kennedy was one of the worst. Kennedy, first of all, invaded South Vietnam. During the Eisenhower administration, they had blocked a political settlement in 1954 and instituted a kind of a Latin American style terror state, which had killed maybe 60 or 70,000 people by the end of the Eisenhower period, and had instigated a response, a reaction. Kennedy recognized that it couldn't be controlled internally, so he simply invaded. In 1962, about a third of the bombing missions that were carried out by the U.S. Air Force in U.S. planes with South Vietnamese insignia, but U.S. pilot. He authorized napalm. He began the use of chemical weapons to destroy food crops. They began programs which drove millions of people into what amounted to concentration camps. Now, that's aggression. In the case of Cuba, it was just a massive campaign of international terrorism, which almost led to the destruction of the world, led to the missile crisis. And we can continue. Again, these are all indictable offenses.
What about Johnson?
Well, Johnson expanded the war in Indochina to the point where ended up probably leaving 3 or 4 million people dead. He invaded the Dominican Republic to block what looked like a potential democratic revolution there, supported the Israeli occupation in its early stages. Again, we can go around the world. Take, say, Carter. You know,
I'll get there, but Nixon's next.
Nixon, we don't even have to talk about. We can skip that one, okay?
Right. But Ford, then Ford.
Well, Ford was only there for a short time, but long enough to endorse the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which became about as close to genocide as anything in the modern period. They pretended to oppose it, but secretly supported, in fact, not so secretly. The U.S., immediately after the invasion, the U.S. did join the rest of the world in formally condemning it at the Security Council. But Ambassador Moynihan was kind enough to explain to us, in his words, that his instructions were to render the United Nations utterly ineffective in any actions it might take to counter the Indonesian invasion. And he says proudly that he did this with considerable success. His next sentence says, in the next few months, it seems that about 60,000 people were killed. And then he goes off to the next topic. That's the first few months, went on to probably hundreds of thousands. Formally, the U.S. announced a boycott of weapons but secretly it increased the supply of weapons, including counterinsurgency equipment, so that the Indonesians could consummate the invasion. That's just a short period in office, but that's indictable. Seriously, in fact, that's a major war crime.
Carter?
Carter increased, as the Indonesian atrocities were increasing. They peaked in 1978. Carter's flow of weapons to Indonesia increased when Congress imposed human rights restrictions. By then there was a human rights movement in Congress to block the flow of advanced weaponry to Indonesia. Carter arranged through Mondale, vice president, to get Israel to send U.S. Skyhawks to Indonesia to enable Indonesia to complete what turned out to be near genocide, killing maybe a quarter of the population or something. In the Middle East, Carter just won the Nobel Prize. His great achievement was the Camp David agreements. The Camp David agreements are presented as a diplomatic triumph for the United States. In fact, they were a diplomatic catastrophe. At Camp David, the United States and Israel accepted, finally, Egypt's 1971 offer, which they had then, U.S. had rejected at the time, except that now it was worse from the U.S.-Israeli point of view because it included the Palestinians. In order to get Israel to accept Egypt's 1971 offer, after a major war and atrocities and so on, Carter raised aid, military and other aid to Israel, to more than 50% of total aid worldwide. Israel used it at once in exactly the way they said they were going to do, as every sane person knew, as an opportunity to attack their northern neighbor, first in 1978, then in 1982, and to increase integration of the occupied territories. And that's for starters. We can continue.
Reagan?
I don't think we have to talk about that one either. I mean, Reagan is the first president to have been condemned by the International Court of Justice for what they called the unlawful use of force, meaning international terrorism, in the war against Nicaragua. Again, that's just for starters. They also, the Security Council endorsed it in 2 resolutions, both of which were vetoed by the United States.
Bush won.
Well, we can begin with the invasion of Panama. The invasion of Panama, which, according to the Panamanians, killed about 3,000 people, since it's never investigated. We don't know if that's true or not. This was done in order to kidnap a disobedient thug who had been supported by the United States right through his worst atrocities. Noriega. He was brought to Florida and tried for crimes that he committed mostly on the CIA payroll. Okay, that's aggression. We could go into the details of the war in Iraq, but there were plainly opportunities for, they might not have worked, we don't know, but there were opportunities for diplomatic settlement, which the Bush administration refused to consider, and incidentally the press would not report, with a single exception, and Long Island Newsday, which did report the whole story throughout accurately, and is the only newspaper in the country to have done so. The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which it's mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein. That takes us off to Clinton, which, that's the beginning, but that's by no means the end. We can run through, well, we can run through, that one case suffices.
All right.
But there are plenty of others.
Bush too?
Well, let's go on with Clinton.
Okay.
One of Clinton's minor escapades, very minor, was sending a couple of cruise missiles to the Sudan to destroy what they knew to be a pharmaceutical plant. There was no intelligence failure. According to the only estimates we have from the German ambassador and the regional director of Near East Foundation, who does field work in Sudan, both of them estimate several tens of thousands of deaths from one cruise missile attack. It's pretty serious. If somebody did that to us, we'd regard it as bad news. And again, we can continue. In the Middle East, for example, Clinton began by declaring past UN resolutions, in the words of his administration, obsolete and anachronistic. Okay, so we're finished with that. No more international law. Then comes a period called a peace process, except that during the peace process, Israeli settlement, which means settlement paid for by the U.S. taxpayer and supported by U.S. military aid and diplomacy, continually increased. The most extreme year was Clinton's last year, the highest level of settlement, the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, the territories were cantonized, broken up into small regions with infrastructure projects and new settlement. I don't know what you call that, but it's under military occupation. And if anyone else was doing it, we'd call it a war crime. And again, we can continue. English too, I don't think we have to discuss.
Your call.
Okay.